Pyramid of Giza was built with around 2.3 million stone blocks, weighing anywhere from 2 and 80 tons.
Hi there, let's be careful not to be misleading here. The overwhelming majority, as in 99+% of the blocks that make up the Great Pyramids were around 2 tons. More specifically, 5.5 million tons worth of those limestone 2-ton tones and about 8,000 tons of those much heavier granite stones that you mentioned. So 99.8% of that weight are those 2-ton blocks.
Some of which were cut from a quarry hundreds of kilometers away, but they did it by dragging them through the sand, right?
Okay, again, let's be careful not to be misleading here. The overwhelming majority of these stones came from the Giza Plateau. Where is that? It is literally where the pyramids are. Almost certainly why the pyramids are built there, just because of how convenient it is that there's so much limestone there. Now, you are right that the granite came from Aswan, which is about 800 kilometers away. Now, you might be like, well, how on earth is it possible that they traveled this distance? Well, let's zoom in a little bit. Let's see if there's anything over there. Oh, it's a river. Those larger, heavier blocks that were hundreds of miles away, they did not drag through the sand, they transported them on the Nile River. That is not a guess. We have found boats capable of carrying this load. This boat was excavated just south of the pyramids of Giza.
Latitude of the pyramid passes directly through this coordinate, which just so happens to be the exact measurement of the speed of light in a vacuum to 9 digits.
Technically, but only because after a few decimal points, the amount that you're moving is going to barely change at all. All right, look, Pyramid of Giza. Let's find out where they are. Boom. You'll notice that while the first couple of digits of this latitude coordinate are the same as what he writes there, they're not all exactly the same. It's not wrong to say that that coordinate is within the pyramid, but so are quite a few coordinates. You'll notice that these last 3 digits over here can essentially just be anything, and you will still be at a latitude that is within the Great Pyramid of Giza. So really, it's just the first 4 and sometimes this 5th digit that match the speed of light in any way that's at all remarkable, because these last 3 can literally be anything.
That pyramids were built as ancient tombs for pharaohs, but not a single mummy nor human remains of any kind have ever been found in any pyramid ever, and that's a fact.
Oh, it is not. So you're right, in the Great Pyramid of Giza, they haven't found any human remains, although they have found a sarcophagus, which I'm pretty sure is meant to hold human remains. But in plenty of the other pyramids, they have found mummy parts and bones and pieces of human remains.
Someone else probably got to all of them first, right?
I mean, yeah, we do know for a fact that these pyramids were severely looted during ancient Egypt because, you know, they were filled with treasures. It's assumed that pretty much everything was taken out by the time of the New Kingdom, which was about 3,500 years ago, so they've been plundered for a while.
Great Pyramid is facing perfectly true north within just 3/60ths of a single degree, making it also perfectly aligned with all cardinal directions, east, west, and south as well. But they probably just used the compass, which was invented by the Chinese over 2,000 years later.
You actually don't need a compass. You can actually just use the stars. Now, the reason people believe this is how they did this now is because not all of the pyramids are perfectly aligned with true north. The previous pyramids had their accuracy slowly improve up until they reached the Great Pyramid, and then all the pyramids afterwards saw their accuracy deteriorate. And that's because the position of the stars in the sky slightly change over time. So if you're using them to mark directions, the direction is going to slightly change as years pass. Currently, they think the 2 constellations they used to orient themselves were probably the Big Dipper and Little Dipper. Why? Well, because in 2467 BC, both of those constellations were in perfect alignment with the North Pole, which is not coincidentally right around the time the Great Pyramid of Giza was built.
If you drew lines from out of the cardinal points of the pyramid and wrapped them all the way around the world, they would go through more land than any other point in the entire world.
That's just because it's in Egypt. Like, Egypt is literally the connecting point for Africa and Eurasia. And with Eurasia taking up 36% of Earth's total land area, Africa taking 20%, that would make Egypt directly connected to more than 50% of the land on the planet. It's not specific to the exact point where the pyramids are, it's just Egypt.
Egyptians had hieroglyphs outlining nearly every aspect of their lives, but not a single one of them depicts the construction of the pyramids.
Actually, nope, we got one. Egypt's oldest papyri detail Great Pyramid construction. Now, this wasn't found till 2013, which is pretty crazy. Apparently, this is a logbook written by some guy named Merer, who detailed the construction operations for the Great Pyramid over several months. Reports on daily lives of the construction workers, notes on the limestone blocks that were exhumed at Tura, transported by boat along the Nile River. Also noted that Khufu's half-brother was overseeing the entire project. I am curious though, like, where did he sign it? Does it say like sincerely Merer somewhere? a room if you're watching this and could let me know how on earth someone's able to read this with that much detail, that'd be cool.
Perimeter of the Great Pyramid as a ratio to its height is the same as the ratio of the Earth's circumference at the equator to its polar radius to within 1/3% margin.
Alright, so this actually isn't purely a coincidence, and there is a lot going on here. So the ratio of the pyramid's perimeter to its height is a number that you might recognize. If you don't, here it is divided by 2. Yeah, it's 2 pi, and the reason that the ratio of the Earth's circumference to its radius is close to 2 pi is because the Earth is a sphere. Yes, technically, I know it's not a sphere, it's an oblate spheroid, shut the fuck up. The circumference of a sphere is literally just 2 pi times the radius, so that part really isn't surprising. My initial thought was that this was very clearly intentional. I mean, Egyptians were very good at geometry. It's not crazy to imagine that they would intentionally use pi in some way when building the pyramids. Apparently, the very first people that were known to compute an approximation for pi were the ancient Egyptians at around 2000 BC. And apparently, some people have also argued this, but the larger consensus is that this is probably not intentional. So then the question is, what are the odds that this would happen just by chance if it isn't intentional? Well, the height of the pyramid is determined by the slope of the pyramid. So we have to see what are the odds that the Egyptians would just happen to choose a slope that would end up giving this ratio of 2 pi. Well, the first thing to keep in mind is that every single pyramid that we have found has had a slope somewhere between 43 and 55 degrees. So I'm going to assume that whatever slope they would choose would be somewhere in between there. And it makes sense, you know, the slope is going to be within a very similar level of steepness for any type of pyramid in order to be structurally sound. However, the ancient Egyptians did not use degrees as a measuring system. They used things called cubits, palms, and digits. Now, in this system, one royal cubit was the equivalent of 7 palms, and each palm was the equivalent of 4 fingers, which means a royal cubit was the equivalent of 28 digits or fingers. So we're going to figure out the slope by determining how many cubits across we travel every time we travel 1 cubit up, or how many digits across we travel every time we travel 28 digits up. Remember, the lower bound for the incline of the pyramid was 43 degrees, which means that the lowest possible ratio for the slope is going to be 0.93, and the highest possible ratio is going to be 1.376. And remember, the way we're going to calculate the slope by using cubits and digits is by doing 28 divided by some number. So we have to see 28 divided by what will keep us between these two values. Well, the largest that the denominator can be is going to be 30 because that gets us a ratio of 0.93. And the smallest that the denominator can be is 21 because that gives us a ratio of 1.33. Because the ratio has to be in between these two numbers in order to be between 43 and 54 degrees. Which means the denominator would have to be somewhere between 21 and 30, which you'll notice is only 10 options. And this one is the one that resulted in our little pi ratio. Which means even if they pick the slope randomly, there is still a 10% chance they would end up with this 2 pi ratio. And 28 over 22 digits was indeed the slope for the Great Pyramid of Giza. You might be asking yourself, why does 28 over 22 somehow turn into pi? Well, take the inverse of this number. You get 22 over 28. Why is it special? Well, if you divide that number by 4, you get goddamn 22 over 7, which is literally an approximation for pi. It's one of the oldest ones ever. Like, it's pretty old. So really it just comes from the fact that Egyptians had a measuring system that used the number 7, and the number 7 just happens to be the denominator in the simplest fractional approximation of pi there is.
The stones in the pyramid are found in the ceiling of the king's chamber. Red granite weighing up to 80 tons, which is as heavy as 2 Boeing 737 planes.
Alright, here's literally one dude pulling a plane. 44,000 pounds, which is 22 tons. So just get 4 of these guys and you're fine. So is the fact that it's in the ceiling really that important? It's not like they're carrying it into the room and then lifting it above their heads. You know, they're stacking the blocks on top of each other. It's just when they stack this particularly heavy block down, there are no blocks underneath it because that's where the room is. I mean, I wasn't there, but I don't know why they would do it any other way.
The original height of the pyramid, around 146.73 meters, is virtually an exact scale of the distance between the Earth and the Sun on the perihelion, which is the Earth's closest approach to the Sun within 0.1% margin of error. The Pyramid of Giza is estimated to weigh around this many metric tons. The entire mass of the Earth is that many metric tons, making the weight of the pyramid an almost perfect scale of the Earth's total mass to, again, within 1/3% of accuracy.
And this is Nicolas Cage, whose birthday is January 7th, aka 1-7. 1 plus 7 equals 8, which is the exact same number of planets in the solar system. He was also married to Patricia Arquette for 6 years, approximately 2,191.5 days, which just so happens to be within 1% of the distance between New York and Denver, Colorado when traveling by bicycle. Also, aside from the fact that, you know, there are a million different numbers in the world that you could compare to the Great Pyramid if these two didn't happen to work, that there are also a million different measurements you could use from the Great Pyramid to try to make comparisons with. He used height and weight. You could also use the lateral height. You could use the perimeter. You could use the side of an edge. You could use the area of one of the faces of the triangle, the area of the base, the diagonal of the base, the surface area of the whole pyramid, the volume of the pyramid. So the fact that some of them out of the dozens that you could have chosen happen to match some other random numbers out of the thousands you could have chosen is not that crazy.